welcome. You're watching Newsroom right here on ET Now. I'm Ajay Sharma. Today's edition is a very special one. We give you a curtain raiser of how things in the environment are turning risky for corporates on fronts like cybersecurity issues like corporate fraud, especially with work from home related. Most of the companies are going encouraging their employees to remain or work from home on a prolonged basis. Nobody wants to take risks. But there is a different kind of risk which is emerging at the horizon. So many corporates across the world and in India are being exposed to cyber risk. But there are organizations which are taking efforts, preventive efforts. There are organizations which are deploying methodologies and technology front on analytic fronts to actually fight this risk and prevent it. We give you a curtain raiser. Today is the full-blown show. I've got three special guests joining us today to discuss the matter. Stakeholders. Deloitte has come out with a very exhaustive survey of top corporates across the country on this various issues, and they will be joining us and represented by Nikhil Bedi. We also got in a corporate view, Amazon India, Gaurav Ajwani will be joining us. And lastly, to cover it up, or in fact, round it up from regulatory side as well, be it RBI, be it SEBI, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that view will be got by Anuj Berry, who's a lawyer with Amar Chand. So we've got all the corners covered and exhaustive survey. The findings are out. Let's start with Nikhil in that case. Nikhil, share with us some of the key findings. How big is the risk? Are Indian corporates really understanding the gravity of the situation? When you went about conducting this across the country, various sectors representation in your survey, what were the key findings?
So really, our fourth edition of our survey really tried to address three things. What is the state of corporate fraud, particularly in this time of the pandemic? The second thing was to understand whether the fraud risk management frameworks of companies are geared up to address the new and emerging risks. And the third one was really what is the role of technology. Some really interesting findings. Overwhelmingly, 80% of our respondents said that corporate fraud is set to rise in the next 2 years. This number is significant because over our previous survey editions, this number is more in the 50-55% benchmark. Also, 70% of the respondents said the fraud losses as a quantum will increase. Now, this is significant given that, about a third of our respondents have said that fraud losses are estimated in the region of 1 to 5% of a turnover of a company. Now, given the pandemic, companies are anyway reeling under the effects of the lockdown, having no business for a large part of 3 months, and now they are trying to recover. So fraud represents a real and present risk, right? The second thing in terms of the preparedness. All our participants, largely about 45% of them have said that the fraud risk management frameworks are not adequate to tackle this future fraud. And the fraud is really emanating from risks such as working from home, as you mentioned, from new business models. Companies are trying to produce new kind of equipment, and the fact there's a lot of technology enablement by corporates in their new business models. So some of these reasons are resulting in this large statistic. The last thing is on technology adoption. So while there has been a lot of technology that corporates have adopted over the last decade or so, but it's more towards fraud prevention. And now the one glaring statistic is about 85% of our respondents say that fraud needs to be prevented, upfront or detected. And not detected as in the past. So these are some of the key statistics, Ajay, that I can, I would like to present to you.
Large was this survey. How many companies participated in it?
So we had over 200 companies participating in our survey. It was quite agnostic in terms of the representation of industries, and a large part of almost 70% plus were companies with turnover in excess of 500 crores.
What are the kind of companies which participated, which sectors, and what seniority level of people or profile of people who are really participated in this?
Mostly it was sector agnostic, so the participants were across sectors, and most of the people who participated were people who were a part of the C-suite or people who were, in the legal functions, in the corporate compliance functions, in the internal audit functions, and people who had direct engagement with the fraud or the risk departments in their particular organizations.
Right. Nikhil, you've been working with corporates across the country for such a long time, and your subject is such as well. What's your own view, the way this risk is, if you could share some of the examples, even global examples? We here at ET now have seen some of the examples of large pharma companies, some of the technology startup companies, many companies actually face such risk. If you, in your own observation, could share some examples, real-life examples, how this issue was faced by companies and then what exactly did they go about doing?
Ajay, some of the key findings, and that's really represented in real time as well, is that, some of the key fraud risks were cyber crimes. And we saw a huge increase in cyber crimes, during this period. And in the last 2 months, you will be aware there are so many large corporates in India who have been affected by cyber crimes, right? The second thing, which is a very interesting observation, both of the survey and our personal experience, is that given the pandemic, there's been a huge dependence on vendors, right? And the overall ecosystem of companies, given that there's largely work from home, right? So there is a deteriorating trust in the vendors. And so much so that our finding, as opposed to earlier where, one of the questions was that who is most likely to commit fraud? And it's this time the answer is vendors, as opposed to employees and senior corporates who have that ability, senior management, in corporates, who have that ability to carry out fraud. The third significant trend is on bribery and corruption. And while a lot has been done and India's rankings have improved, our survey and our real life experience suggests that given, again, this dependence on vendors, these new business models, there is a large perception that bribery and corruption will be rampant and is rampant, right? So much so that even Transparency International in their findings earlier this week said that India is, while things have progressed and have got better, that India is the least in terms of Asia-Pac nations. It's last in terms of its bribery and corruption perception. So these are some of the trends that we have seen. I think that corporates are now, now that they have kind of been able to respond, assimilate the issues in the pandemic, they've got operations back to a certain level. They are now trying to readjust their fraud risk management systems to kind of cater to some of these issues, right? So this is what we are seeing in our experience, Ajay.
Let's also shift focus and get a corporate view on it. And none other than better than Amazon, one of the global corporates doing phenomenally well here in India as well, and has contributed in its own way to really develop the tech-backed company kind of an ecosystem here in India. And with growth also comes risk, and especially this kind of a risk because of the entire workplace getting disrupted due to COVID, pandemic, etc. I have with me Gaurav with Money joining us. Gaurav, you also heard Nikhil and must have gone through the findings of the survey. How, as a representative of one of its kind tech-backed companies globally and here in India as well, how do you assess the risk which corporates are facing in this field right now?
Yeah. Thanks, Ajay. So when Nikhil was talking about various fraud trends, it did not come to me as a surprise because, if you look at the classic fraud triangle laid down by Donald Cressy in the early 1900s, it talks about opportunity, rationalization, and pressure. So as India is growing, there's always been opportunity, and people are very good at rationalizing their conduct. But with the pandemic, what we are seeing is people are having increased pressure to do something which they were not doing. And this could be basically because of socioeconomic reasons as to why they are forced or probably end up into a situation where they choose the other route. So I think that's the reason where you will see an increase in the number of frauds in the next coming years. And I think Deloitte's survey mentions that about 80% of the respondents believe that in the next 2 years, fraud is going to increase. Now, as far as corporates is concerned, I think all the corporates, all the large organizations are concerned in the sense that they want to ensure that they have mechanisms in place to ensure that all of this gets checked out. And I think what corporates are doing, they're addressing this issue in two ways. One is preventive and the other is reactive. Preventive is basically going the old school ways by increased number of trainings, communications to their respective team members, and also ensuring that there is a clear tone at the top. Although it sounds very small, but it plays a major role in driving the culture of the organization. Right. So getting the right tone at the top, ensuring that, you're again training your people again and again, talking to them about compliance, talking to them about how important it is to, follow the company policies, especially in these times, these testing times. And it becomes increasingly important for everyone to stay compliant, not get carried away by what's happening around them. So I think that's one piece. The second piece, I think Nikhil briefly touched upon it, is the role of technology. I think as corporates increase in size, I think it's very important for technology to use technology in a way to create a control framework to monitor what's going on into the organization. So I think a combination of both of them will actually help all the organizations to address the risks that we are seeing in these turbulent times.
Gaurav, another thing which needs to be seen from the corporate side is much of this risk is permanent in nature. Because the entire relationship between employees and workplace has got disrupted. Many organizations are taking a complete relook at the way they would be, having their teams working in offices. Some of them will go work from home on a permanent nature. What are your thoughts in a pre-COVID world, the risk, the way being assessed to corporate frauds and cybercrime, cybersecurity as a whole, and in a post-COVID world, how some of the more permanent and more durable and sturdier, prevention systems perhaps will be required? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the major risks around the pre-COVID and post-COVID era is around the information security risk. You rightly mentioned that, more and more companies are choosing towards the work from home kind of a scenario, as a result of which information security risk remains or continues to be the key risk to address. Earlier in an office environment, it was relatively easy for companies to monitor their employees, have them work in a more secured environment. So it was easy for them to address that particular risk. But I think with these new norms around working from home, information security is the key risk at this point of time. What are organizations doing? There are a lot of, again, technology-enabled solutions that are available, which are legally compliant, on basis of which corporations are basically checking on what their employees are doing. One may argue that some of these solutions infringe into an individual's privacy, but I think the corporations are basically asking the employees before joining that this is something, or this quality check would be done on a regular basis in a work from home environment. Additionally, corporations, especially the financial sector, they're putting in additional norms when it comes to employees downloading heavy files from the company's intranet or transferring files over there. So more and more technology-enabled solutions are put in place as employees are working remotely, so that any such trigger that happens, the company gets a notification to look into any anomaly caused by either excessive downloading or excessive use of a particular internet site or downloading of some confidential information. So those solutions are already in place. So I think technology solutions are playing a greater role now in a post-COVID era, Ajay.
Right. Gentlemen, stay with us. Nikhil, Gaurav, Anuj, all three of you. In fact, Gaurav, Amazon is the industry leader in its own way. I'd like to have some more questions going with you, some of the best practices that you guys are deploying at the company, how the top leadership looks at this issue, the seriousness of this, and more questions coming for you before we go to the regulatory side. Time for a very short break. More analysis on this very big, important emerging issue after this break. Welcome back. Still watching the newsroom right here on ET Now. Today's focus is cybersecurity and corporate frauds and how companies across the country are working to mitigate or reduce the risk. Deloitte has conducted a very exhaustive survey in this field, and we have got experts joining us from corporate side, from Deloitte, as well as from the regulatory side shortly to discuss that. Nikhil, before I go to Gaurav about some of the industry best practices which are being deployed, I want to understand from you the role of technology, analytics, how open companies are working with experts in this field in order to have systems in place so that prevention can be better than cure.
So, Ajay, very interesting question. So, over the last decade, it's really been about reacting to fraud in India, right? But over the years, I think, given the importance of fraud, the loss of reputation, loss of business, the loss of profit, I think companies have now pivoted or are in the point of pivoting and trying to prevent fraud, or they are trying to predict fraud, actually. Technology, as you rightly said, plays a pivotal role. Currently, what we have seen is that a lot of companies are largely, using static models, risk-based models. They've implemented some amount of risk analytics, right? But really, the future is all about implementing artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that, there are real-time fraud alarms. And you don't then need to react to fraud, but you can actually detect it real time. And a lot of our survey participants have also indicated that, almost half of them, that they are in the process of implementing such technology so that they can make that pivot from reactive to preventive, predictive. And we are actually seeing that, increasingly, we earlier used to try and hire CAs and MBAs, but today, most of us are increasingly seeing that the role of technology consultants or people with technology backgrounds is pivotal to our business. And I feel in the years to come, we're going to actually have 50% of forensic teams consisting of the functional experts as well as the technology experts.
Nikhil, that's a very important point. It may look small or normal, but reskilling or upskilling of our critical roles towards technology, getting them up to speed with the latest methodologies, be it adopting technology or processes and methods is very important. I wanted to understand from you what kind of costs are involved, what kind of stakes, what kind of value is at stake. A lot of companies still may have a mindset that this is a cost which is being accrued to the company. Is it justified at such time or not? But over the longer term, the kind of value which is at stake may be way higher. So perhaps taking that cost now will be much more prudent compared to a bigger risk to the valuation of the company, value to the financials, all of that on a later date in the longer term.
Right. So absolutely. And, a lot of, very often, it's looked, fraud risk management has looked like a cost center. But really, one has to change their mindset because, the cost of fraud is really very high. There's financial penalties, regulatory penalties, loss of reputation, loss of customers. So it's really intangible to a large extent, right? Apart from what we can quantify. So one of the key aspects is really, and even our survey brings this out, is that you need to reprioritize investments into fraud risk management. Right. And this is something which is very critical. Now, there are lots of technology companies. There are lots of tools whereby one can actually, implement these technologies in new age businesses. And that's what, some of us seek to do. It's with technology companies, which functional experts such as us who have the requisite technology skills in-house. Right. So it's very critical that this happens. And obviously, given the pandemic, the focus was on operationalizing the business or getting the operations back on track. But now the focus has to be on, trying to ensure that there is enough preventive fraud risk management systems in place to address the new age, issues which are brought on by remote working, new business models, etc.
Gaurav, I wanted to understand from you what kind of discussions do you have with your top leadership management on this subject? What kind of best practices you guys at Amazon are actually deploying, or some of your peers in the industry are looking closely at, and is in your observation as well?
Sure. So I can talk about the industry as a whole as to what are some of the best practices that people are following. But I just want to take 1 second and just comment about the cost center thing that Nikhil just mentioned. There is a perception that the fraud risk function is more of a cost center, but I know of a lot of compliance officers who've turned things around and made compliance function or the risk function as a profit center by the amount of fraud risk that they are saving for their organizations. If you look at the survey that Deloitte just mentioned about companies thinking about losing 1 to 5% of their revenues towards fraud and abuse, that's a lot of money. Right. And if you have an effective fraud risk program in place, you can save a lot of money and turn that cost center into a profit center as well. Right. And I have, direct feedback from some of the compliance officers who've actually turned it into a profit center. Now, coming back to some of the best practices around that. I think having a strong anti-fraud function is the key to everything, right? And there's a small story that I would quickly want to tell you. There was a lady who was suffering from some disease. She went to a lot of doctors, asked for help. The doctors could not find a remedy because there was nothing that was detected. So one doctor, she went to another doctor, and he knew that there's nothing as such. So he gave her a vitamin pill saying that this is something which will cure your illness. And magically that thing worked. In our fraud or risk management setup, we call this as the placebo effect. Just by having an effective fraud control unit and communicating it to your teams reduces the occurrence of fraud. And this has been proven statistically worldwide, right? So I think the first thing is to have a proper anti-fraud unit in place where employees should also have the facility to report fraud independently. So having another grievance mechanism by having an independent ombudsperson or a grievance officer where people can go ahead and report their concerns is utmost required. Then second thing is have clear guidance on policies and processes as to on everything possible. Could it be your things as small as gift reporting policies to entertainment policies to travel policies? That sets the tone. That removes ambiguity in the minds of the people so that they know exactly what is expected out of them. Right? There's no room for any kind of illegal payments or anything, any fraud as such. The third is training and communication. Right? The more you train people about the right thing to do, it sets the tone. It really drives the culture of the organization. So the more you tell people, the more it's like on the face, the more people would kind of embed it in their daily activities. So it's very important to have effective training and communication program. Training could be both online and offline. A combination of both actually works. Then tone at the top, walk the talk. The leader of the organization should actually go ahead and communicate to the staff about the right thing to do and have a zero tolerance policy whenever people breach that particular policy or process. So I think these 4-5 things are, from time to time we've seen have actually gone through the test of time and have been proven really, really effective if done properly. Ajay.
Right. Anuj Berry is also here with us. Anuj, I know you got stuck in court, but it's a very important issue you're discussing here. Your input is very valuable. Talk to us from the regulatory side, be it the RBI, be it SEBI, be it, Ministry of Corporate Affairs. How are they really moving in tandem with, with corporate sector, with the evolving situation? and experts who are trying to put preventive systems for corporate India and even at the global level. How is regulator playing its own important role in this area?
My apologies for the delay, but happy I could still join and contribute here in whichever little way I can. But I think, Adish, that's a great question. I'm seeing a lot of activity, and I'll divide it into two parts. The COVID-19 fraud situation has yet not come up high up on the radar. I think those facts are still being unearthed, if at all. And, you may see activity in that early next year from the regulators. Generally speaking, and I think everyone here, deals with these regulators in some form as a stakeholder, I'm seeing immense activity in RBI, in SEBI, in the SFIO, which is now the new kid on the block as far as enforcing fraud laws are concerned. And the activity can be, if you look at it from the regulator's perspective, I think you're finally seeing Western trends of enforcement in levels. If you see it from, the corporate sector's activity, I think they are seeing it obviously as a pain point because the regulators are not always getting it right. I think the challenge, as we always face, is if there's a doubt, investigate. But that's not the mantra for which the regulators have been set up for. I think the areas that need ironing out is more sophistication, more surveillance by these regulators, more interaction before they decide to launch an investigation. Because once the investigation is launched, they are never closed. In my experience, none of these corporate investigations ever reach a closure. They file shoddy prosecutions and then leave it for the courts to get off their back. So while the regulatory enforcement trend is good from sending a message, I think it's also a little irrational, a little immature, if I can call it that way, with all due respect, because when we test the evidence and the courts test it, they fail. So the activity is definitely there. I think the SFIO is most active. CBI, ED, remit is a little less compared to these regulators. You picked on a very important regulator, the SEBI. I think we are all grappling with their recent attempt to, get companies to disclose the minute they smell a forensic audit within the organization. I think that's a big message they're sending out there. It has its own problems. It's not thought through. There are many nuances to that, but they've set it out there. And I think from here on, if they interact properly with all stakeholders, they can fine tune that process. But I think the initiative is much higher than ever before.
Right. All right, gentlemen, all three of you, Nikhil, Anuj, and Gaurav, thanks so much for joining us with the 360-degree analysis of Deloitte survey of how important corporate fraud and risk management issue is now in today's changing world, and how companies which are proactive are working with experts to put systems in place so that they can minimize this risk and make it much more manageable. With that, it's a wrap on the show. Thanks very much for watching.